Wow. thank you for coming out tonight on a rainy evening. Isn't that good? I like that. We're in chapter 41. If you were not here last week, we're going to do a little bit of a recap so that we can catch up to where we are. We've got Joseph out of jail, and that's a really good thing. Now we're going to see how he rises to power. But I want to point out something about the time he was in jail that would seem heartbreaking, because he was supposed to be gotten out earlier, he thought. Man didn't tell anybody about it, so he stayed there 2 long years. And you know, I had this funny thought come to my mind. God works in such mysterious ways. If he had been released from jail, where do you think he'd have gone? So how would they have found him when they needed to interpret Pharaoh's dream? Do you ever think about stuff like that? God works all this stuff around. In your life and my life, everything is tied together. It's all tied together. Even though we can't see it, it's tied together. Now, several things I want you to see in some of the verses we read last week, and then we'll pick up with the selection of Joseph to the position of authority. If you have your Bibles open in chapter 41, I want to point out a few things. In verse 16, Joseph answered Pharaoh, said, God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And then if you look over to verse 25, Joseph says, God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. And then in verse 28, God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do again. And then in verse 32, this thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Do you see what, through the Spirit of God, this young man is doing? He is portraying to this pagan man who was almost worshipped as a god that there is a true and living God. And he didn't take any of the credit for any of this. Now, let's start there with verse 33, and we'll quickly move through the rest of this chapter because it's so important. You know the story of the 7 fat cows and the 7 thin cows and the 7 heads of grain that were bountiful and the 7 that were dried up and withered. And of course, this was a prediction of the famine that was to come after the 7 years of plenty. And so now Pharaoh doesn't really know what to do. So in verse 33, Joseph is going to make a suggestion. Let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect a fifth of the produce of the land, and let them gather all the food of those good years that were coming, and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, and that the land may not perish during the famine. Now that is an administrative plan that sets Joseph aside as a leader. He's always been a leader. He was in Potiphar's house for only a short time till he led the whole household. He was in jail for only a short time till he led most everything that took place in the jail. And now this administrative ability of his is about to rise to the top. It's very important that we see this. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh. This is a really important verse, these two in the Bible, verses 37 and 38. And in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? But that is a profound statement. This is a pagan man. I don't know if we have any Egyptologists in here or not, but y'all have all read National Geographic, haven't you? That Egypt is a strange place. I mean, they love kitty cats. They worshipped all kinds of strange animals and forces of nature. They were a very pagan people. And he is wise enough, though, that he has seen through this dream and the fear that God put in him through this dream. And to have this young man come up who is constantly, as we read earlier in the chapter, brought before him the fact that God's going to work this out. God is in control. This is in God's plan. And he sees this now. And he says, there's not been such a one as this man in whom is the Spirit of God. I believe that we're 41 chapters into the book of God, the Bible, and I believe this is the first time that it's mentioned that there is someone who emanates the Spirit of God like this. It's an amazing thing, just an amazing thing. I believe that's a correct statement. In whom is the Spirit of God. Now, Pharaoh gives Joseph quite a standing here. He says in verse 39, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. And then he gives him this commission, really. Look at this. This is amazing. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. In other words, Pharaoh says, only in matters of state. In other words, visiting dignitaries, making the rules and regulations and stuff, he would reserve that. But everything else would be under Joseph's hand. This young man has gone from rags, literally, to riches in a very short time. This is an amazing, amazing story. Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. And look at what he did. He took his signet ring off, and he put it on Joseph's hand. He clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. You know, I imagine he had a chain around his neck when he was a slave going down there to Egypt, but I don't think it was a gold one. He has seen tremendous changes in the 13 years since he was sold into slavery. What tremendous changes he's seen. Had him ride in the second chariot, that would be Air Force Two. You know, Pharaoh was the biggest and finest, but this is Air Force Two here. This is the one that the vice president runs around in the second chariot. But it's interesting to note that that chariot, wherever it went in Egypt, it was obviously marked with royalty. And you'll see that in the verse in a moment. Anybody that would see that chariot coming down the road, and I'm sure there was a huge entourage with it, would know that this is something special. Don and I had the privilege a few years ago of going to England, and we did go as tourists, and it was really a blessing. We stayed in a little village called Tunbridge in Kent, and it's a beautiful, Kent is a garden spot on the United Kingdom. And, well, Scotland's beautiful too, but, you know, Kent's a beautiful, beautiful place. But not far from Kent, not far from Tunbridge, about 7 or 8 miles, is a little village, and it's called Royal Tunbridge Wells. So I asked someone while we were there, I said, well, why was that called there? And they said, well, the king never visited Tunbridge, but he visited Tunbridge Wells back in about 1400 or 1300 or something. And so just because the king's entourage passed through that little place, it is today still known as Royal Tunbridge Wells. That's what is going to take place when Joseph rides around Egypt. He's going to cover that whole land in this next 7 years, and even in the years to follow, in the famine years. And whenever he comes around, people are going to know it. They're going to know it. So let's see how it comes about. Verse 44. Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all of Egypt. Now that's power. No one could do anything unless Joseph agreed to it. Very, very important. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah. I practiced that. I have a Bible pronunciation app. Do you have one? I do. And it pronounces every word in the Bible that is difficult to pronounce. And I listened to that fellow 3 or 4 times, and he said, Zaphnath-Paneah. That's what he said. That's what he said. Now here's another interesting part. He gave him as a wife Asenath, a daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. So even the wife that was given to him is of royalty, whether he wanted her or not. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt, and he was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He was 17 when he was sold into slavery. So he's been out 13 years away from his family now. That'll be important in a little while. Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And now in the 7 plentiful years, the ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. Now these 7 years produced record crops. That was God working in this place. And Joseph extracted from the people more than they would normally be asked to give. And it was to supply for the next 7 years. And so his job, his administration's job, was to do this for these 7 years. And he apparently did it very well, because it said there became so much food that they just stopped counting it and storing it. Now verse 50 is very interesting. For to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of the famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. Manasseh. That name indicates that this son's coming to earth, his firstborn son, was a name that would cause him to be forgetful, or to make forgetful about all the stuff that's taking place. And that's very important. Very important. For God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. When he put that name on that boy, Manasseh, it was indicative of the fact that this man's character, Joseph's character, was just impeccable. That he could forgive not only the incident that happened in Potiphar, not only being forgotten in jail for those 2 years, not only serving for 7 or 8 years in Potiphar's house, and then way back before that, his brothers mistreating him and selling him into slavery. He could forgive that. He can forget that. It's not something that's bearing on him now. For God has made me forget. Now look at verse 52. And the name of the second he called Ephraim. These two names, the name of Ephraim, by the way, means fruitfulness. And you'll notice that these are not Egyptian names. These are Hebrew names. Isn't that interesting? He's married to an Egyptian woman that was given to him as wife. And these 2 sons then are given Hebrew names. And their names, as we'll see when we get to the end of this book, their names are implanted and engrafted into the tribes of Israel. What a beautiful picture this is. For God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come. You know, when people are having a good time and everything's going along good, they don't think too much about what's going on. They're just enjoying life. But then when it shuts down a little bit, things change. It makes you more introspective. And that's what we've gone through here since back in the early part of this year when this disease started. There's been some huge changes. And it causes you to think and keep in your mind what is really, really important. The famine was in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. Why? Because God saw fit for these people to have this stored up. And Joseph was the reason it got stored up. So, verse 55 says, when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, do. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all the countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all lands. The only place that had stored up grain was in Egypt. And the only place that had anything was in Egypt. Now, we're going to change gears here just a minute and look at something very interesting. Chapter 42. You knew we'd get back to this because you've read this before and you've heard sermons preached about it, but we have to bring this family into this thing. Verse 42, or chapter 42 begins this way. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look at one another? In other words, y'all do something. You know, we're starving to death here. There's grain down there in Egypt. Do something. Why are you looking at each other? And he said, indeed, I've heard there's grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die. It's important to note that the family of Jacob was wealthy. They still had money. They still had the wherewithal to buy grain. They just didn't have anything to eat. You know, Don and I old Dave Ramsey fans. Y'all know Dave Ramsey? You ever heard of him? Yeah, man, he rescued us years ago. Like he used to say, I had a PhD in DUMB, and he rescued us. And he was talking about when that Hurricane Katrina came through New Orleans back in those days, and he never did, and still doesn't like anybody to invest in gold, because it's really not a very good investment, but that's a whole other story. But he said, you know, if you were on the streets of New Orleans 2 or 3 days after that hurricane hit, and you had a wheelbarrow full of gold, it'd be absolutely worthless to you. But if you had a truck filled with bottled water, you'd be a wealthy man. Think about it. That's what they needed. And the Egyptians had food. Jacob had a whole lot of stuff and a lot of money, but he didn't have anything to eat. And so that's a very, very good lesson. Go down there and buy some grain that we may live and not die. So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. You see, he only had 2 sons by that favorite daughter. You remember that. One of them now is the premier in Egypt, Joseph, and the other is the youngest son, Benjamin, who is still with him. And the sons of Israel, now notice that God's author changed here and used his proper name that God would give him as one who is following him now, not Jacob, but Israel, went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over all the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Now, does that remind you of anything that happened way long back? A dream that Joseph had when they were out in the field, that his brothers would bow down to him. And you know how angry they got about that? That was probably one of the things that ticked them off to the point they wanted to get rid of him. And then he even had another part of that dream that said even the sun, moon, and stars, which means all of his family, even his father and mother, would bow down to him. And here they are. Here they are. Now, why do you think they didn't recognize Joseph? Well, think about it a little bit. If these were Hebrews that are described in the Bible, their hair was long, and they had long beards, and they dressed in garb like a Hebrew would look. Now, what do you think Joseph looked like? He looked like an Egyptian. His head was either shaved or it was cut in a certain fashion that was just like you've seen in the hieroglyphs. He probably had this really unusual hat on his head, and he had clothing like they had never seen on his body. And he spoke the Egyptian language. Now, several reasons that they did not recognize him, and that's one of them. The other one is they assumed that he was dead. The last they saw of him, he was in chains being led to Egypt in a caravan of Ishmaelites. They had no idea whether he even survived to get down there. And so they had, by their own words, as we'll see later, they said that he is no more. He is no more. So this is an interesting scenario. I've pictured this in my mind a million times. These fellows coming down there, a long journey. They're out bound to be just unkept. They've been on a long journey, hundreds of miles. And they come before this fellow that pretty much rules the whole country. And he has control of the reign, and they bow down to him. And he says roughly, he's speaking to them coarsely, roughly, and there's a reason for that. Where do you come from? He wants to put them off. In other words, he knows who they are. And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them and said to them, you're spies. You've come to see the nakedness of the land. In other words, you've come to see our land in in an exposed condition. You want to see what's going on down here. And they said to him, no, my Lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We're all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies. But he said to them, no, but you've come to see the nakedness of this land. And they said, your servants are 12 brothers. Now listen to this confession. The sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today. And one is no more. You see, if you believe someone is dead and gone, you would not be looking for them. You would not be expecting them. So not only his Egyptian garb, not only the fact that he's speaking through an interpreter intentionally, he's speaking the Egyptian language and not the Hebrew, but the fact that they don't even consider that Joseph could still be alive. It's been 13 years. And so they just said, one is with our father and one is no more. That's one of the saddest verses in the Bible. You see, this is where you'll begin to see in the next few chapters that they are truly sorrowful for what they've done. They really are. They're very repentant. This is a beautiful, beautiful picture here. But Joseph said to them, it is as I spoke to you, saying, you're spies. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Now that's a blanket statement that all 10 of them would be kept down there until that youngest came. Now that would put fear in them. Why? Because if they don't go back, they have brought obviously a tremendous amount of money and goods with them. If they don't go back, all of that's going to be lost. But worse than that, their family, and it's more than just Benjamin and Jacob's wives, it's probably hundreds of people that they're responsible for. They would starve to death. They would starve to death. And so this is a tremendous, tremendous letdown to them. On a modern basis, that would be, I read a book 2 or 3 years ago about the South Korean missionary who went to North Korea and accidentally left a hard drive in his briefcase. And he didn't know what was in there, and it had a lot of Christian stuff on it, a lot of teaching things, and when they found that and downloaded that stuff, they put him in jail. And his sentence was, I forgot now, I had read the book a couple of years ago, it seemed like it was 20 years of hard labor. 20 years of hard labor. And that so depressed him, he was just heartbroken about that. Now, he didn't have to work that long. He was there a few years, 3 or 4 years, I believe. But he did get out by the help of many people in the diplomatic area. But it broke his heart to know 20 years for this mistake I made. These men are facing incarceration, the whole mess of it, if that youngest brother would come. But we'll see in a moment that doesn't take place. See, send one of you and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there's any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. So he put them all together in prison 3 days. Then Joseph said to them the 3rd day, do this and live, for I fear God. Oh, isn't that interesting? Think about that now. These men, these brothers, are worshipers of Jehovah God. Now this man, this Egyptian that is in control of their future, brings up the name of God. He says, I fear God. If you're honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house. But you, the rest of you, go and carry grain for the famine of your houses. Now, for 3 days, they've been in turmoil, all of them incarcerated. And can you imagine the talk that went on during those 3 days? And now this man's heart has softened. And he relates to the fact that he fears God. Now, Joseph is working this plan all the way through. It's what God had to do. And he says, all of you but one, go home and take all this grain so you can feed your families. and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die. Now that's the condition. One must stay, the other 9 can go and take the food back, but they've got to come back and bring this youngest one. And that would be a proof test that they are honest men. And look at that verse, the end of that verse in verse 21. And they did so. And they said to one another, this is just beautiful right here. We are truly guilty concerning our brother. For we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this distress has come upon us. True repentance in your life will bring you and me to the point where we are brokenhearted about sin in our own life. And you have to get to that point before God can work with you, before He can bring salvation into your heart. And then if you're a child of God, when we fail and we sin and we repent of that, that's what it takes for God to reach down and do a work in us that will move us from where we are and where He wants us to be, where He desires us to be. And that's what these men have done. It's taken 13 years. And no telling how much heartache and misery and guilt and talk they've done through those 13 years. And now it comes out. We saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. I imagine every one of us in here could share a story about how we knew to do right and didn't do it. And it may be something not too terribly earth-shattering, or again, it may be something that just is heartbreaking. I remember, and I think I've told you this, I remember one time there was a man that I knew and I cared a great deal about, but I knew he was lost. And he was in the hospital, and someone told me he had a really bad heart. He had all kinds of heart trouble. And they called me and told me he was in the hospital with Athens, and he was really sick. And you know what I did? I was real busy. It was a busy time of year. And I said, I need to go down there this afternoon and visit with him. And I was just so tired. I said, oh man, I just don't feel like it. I'll go tomorrow. And I did the same thing the next day. Man, it was a tough day. And I said, Lord, I'll go tomorrow. And he died that night. And I've never forgotten. I don't know if anyone ever witnessed to him. I don't know if God reached out to him on that deathbed before he passed away. But I have never, ever forgotten him. And that's a little bit about this verse here. These brothers, they remembered how Joseph begged them for mercy, and they wouldn't hear it. Now look at verse 22. Do you remember Reuben's place in the incident when they had him before they sold him? Reuben had a great deal to do with that. Reuben answered them, saying, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy? You wouldn't listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. They didn't know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. Apparently, they're still in the presence of Joseph, and they're saying all this in Hebrew, and he, of course, remembers Hebrew. He's sitting there listening to them and clearly understands every word they're saying, even though he had spoken to them through an interpreter. Don't you know this just fills his heart with anguish, with just the tears of regret over what's taking place in his family. And he turned himself away from them, and he wept. I just picture that in my mind. He could not take it any longer. He just could not take it any longer. Then he returned to them again and talked with them, and he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Isn't that amazing? He took Simeon and bound him before their eyes. Then verse 25 says, Joseph gave a command to their sacks be filled with grain, to restore every man's money in his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Is that mercy or what? All the money they bought to buy grain, he puts in the bags with them and hides it in there so they won't know it. He returned it to them, and they didn't even know it was in there. Thus he did for them, so they loaded their donkeys with grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to get a donkey feed at the encampment, he saw the money that there was in the mouth of his sack, and he said to his brothers, my money's been restored, and there it is in my sack. Then their hearts failed them as they were afraid, saying one to another, what is this that God has done to us? See, now they're fearful that it looks like they didn't pay for the grain, and here they are leaving with it. What a horrific thing that is. And they went to Jacob, their father, in the land of Canaan, and told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man who is Lord of the land spoke roughly to us and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, we're honest men, we're not spies. We're 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, the youngest is with you, with our father this day in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the country, now see, that's Lord is little L, not big Lord, big L, like God is, said to us, by this I will know that you're honest. Leave me one of your brothers here with me, and take food for the famine for your household and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me, so that I shall know that you're not spies, but that you are honest men. And I'll grant your brother to you, and you shall make trade in the land. Now, see, he's giving them a consolation prize here. If you come back, then you'll be restored, and you can trade in the land and freely move about. Then it happened as they emptied their sacks that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. That is a common thing. What if you were to go somewhere tomorrow and buy something and pay cash for it, and then get home and find out that somewhere or another you have the same amount of money you had when you left, and you've got this good or this service that you've gone, and you think, oh my word, what in the world? Now, a person in the world would say, oh, goody, goody, I made out on that deal. But a child of God would say, this is not right. This is not right. And so now there's this angst amongst them. They were afraid. And Jacob, their father, said to them, you have bereaved me. And look what he brings up. The first thing he brings up, Joseph is no more. You know, I know in my heart that he suspected that David had done something to Joseph. And it's been 13 years, and he has not forgotten. That's the first thing he brings up. And Simeon is no more. In other words, I don't ever expect to see him again. He's in Egypt, hundreds of miles away, held by a pagan bunch of people down there. And you want me to take Benjamin? You want to take him down there? All these things are against me. I can just envision old Jacob just nearly falling on his face in bereavement. One son is apparently dead. One of his favorite sons is kept captive down in Egypt, and now they want to take this precious other son, Benjamin, down there. And Reuben spoke to his father, saying, now this is an oath if I ever heard one. Kill my two sons if I don't bring him back to you, and put him in my hands, and I'll bring him back to you. That's a strong statement. He says, you kill my two kids if I don't go down there and get him and bring him back. If I don't take Benjamin and then bring Benjamin back, I promise you I will do that. But he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. In other words, there's only two children from this precious wife. The one he truly loved, and one of them's dead, and the other one's the only one he's got left. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Now, we'll see the next time we meet how they finally convince Jacob, or Jacob is finally convinced to let them go and take Benjamin with them. It takes a lot of trust and a lot of prayer on their part. Now, we'll begin there with chapter 43 the next time we meet. Now, I need to announce, Pastor and I talked about this Sunday, it was a suggestion of his, I will be gone next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I don't think I will be back in time to be here for our Bible study. And Pastor suggested, and he's going to announce this Sunday morning also, that we dispense with services next Wednesday night, because it is the week of Labor Day weekend, and many people he thinks would be traveling probably. And so at his suggestion, he wanted me to announce tonight that next Wednesday night, we would not have Bible study. And he's going to announce that Sunday. And then the next week, we'll start right back like we were, right back where we were studying. Now, another thing I want to mention, because it's going to be so important, that we're going to have the Lord's Supper Sunday. It's coming Sunday. And I am looking forward to it, because we're going to do it differently than we've ever done it before. And I'm going to leave it at that, so you'll be very interested to tell other people about it, so that you tell them, if you'll come Sunday, it'll be like nothing else you've ever seen. I'm not going to tell you anything else. Okay? It's going to be different. And I just can't hardly wait when I say it. I may go up here Saturday night and spend the night. But I asked Lou if the deacons are supposed to wear our suits and stuff. We don't know. When Pastor's not here, maybe I'll text him if he wouldn't fall out of the boat or lose his phone, text me back tomorrow while he's fishing. But anyway, you be here, and we're going to do it differently, because we can't bring the elements down and pass them amongst you. So you just be here to see how it's going to turn out. Have I piqued your interest? Mm-hmm. Tell somebody, I'd like this church to be filled on Sunday morning. Let's do our prayer request. I want to thank God right now for that precious rain.